Deep-rooted man here. One question atheists can't answer. Ah, yes. Uploaded by this guy. Counsel of Trent. One question atheists can't answer. Ah, yes. There's many questions that cannot be answered because you preload them to be unanswerable. Like I could say, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? You can't answer that. Checkmate. Making questions that people can't answer is relatively simple. However, he does ask a question that's actually worth investigating, which is nice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So he spends a bit of time explaining, uh, you know, what's going on, and we'll do that. So yeah.
And today I want to talk about atheism, or a part of atheism that I think has a fundamental flaw. But to understand why, I need to talk about something else called the God of the Gaps objection. So basically, it goes like this. God of the Gaps objection claims that arguments for the existence of God, they all fail because they all essentially say the same thing.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop you because no, God of the Gaps, the fallacy in and of itself is not about all arguments. So that's already misrepresenting what the God of Gaps fallacy is. Um, so let's bring that up so that we can examine what it actually is, or at least what it's said to be by a couple of different websites. A few things online, I suppose. You could argue with those and say that that's it. Taking the first search thing that pops up here. That's Wikipedia at the top there. God, the term God of the Gaps fallacy can refer to a position that assumes the act of God as a explanation for an unknown phenomenon. So this is a variant of the argument from ignorance fallacy. So then, there's other things that cover this. So argument. So it might be better to just say, well, of ignorance fallacy. So fallacy is a mistaken belief. Okay, so ignorant appeal to ignorance occurs when personally mistakenly believes something to be true or not because they don't know enough about the subject, they don't have enough evidence, etc. So, yeah, that's a decent example of the argument from ignorance. And here you're just replacing X with God. So I don't know how X, Y, and Z works, therefore God. I don't know how this thing is, so therefore it must be God. And that's the God of the Gaps. So it's not every single argument that theists make contains that particular fallacy. Some do, and some might not. So to kind of characterize that this is something that is being said of all the arguments, I think I think is a bit not correct there. So, all right.
Here's something we can't explain, or here is a gap in our knowledge. God explains the gap in our knowledge, therefore God exists. In other words, you can't argue in this way. I don't know what caused X, therefore God exists. That's a bad argument. Now, the unexplained thing, it might be morality or the beginning of the universe or the existence of something rather than nothing. Whatever it is, atheists say we don't want to rush to a supernatural explanation because we might miss an undiscovered or unknown natural explanation.
All right, got to stop you again. I don't know that atheists, in fact, do say that. I would say, as a skeptic and atheist, although my words are just my own, cannot represent others, that the natural is known, the supernatural is not. There is no such category as the supernatural uh, yet. That is to say, it has not been demonstrably demonstrated to be a category. It's a category in philosophy, yes. That is within linguistics. That is to say, the word itself exists. So yes, it's a category in that sense, but it's a category of the mind. It's not a category that we can demonstrate in any reasonable way, and that's a problem. So instead of saying supernatural, we could say magic. That's more blunt. That gets to the core of the problem a lot quicker, because typically, broadly speaking, people don't believe in magic, hopefully, so they would reject the notion of magic being an explanation for anything. And I could just say, no, the existence of the universe is magic. The morality is magic. The way that humans got here, that's magic. Anything could be answered by this explanation. But the problem is the explanation isn't actually an explanation, because I have not yet demonstrated that magic is even a thing yet. So it's not just about rushing to a magical explanation, it's the fact that there's no demonstration that magic even is an explanation. So forget about trying to rush towards a supernatural explanation. You haven't yet demonstrated that the supernatural is even a explanation in the first place. And until you do it, there's no reason to posit it as even a possibility until it's been discovered to be one, which it hasn't been. And that's the problem.
And actually, a lot of Christians feel the same way. The Lutheran pastor and Holocaust victim Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote this. He wrote, "How wrong it is to use God as a stopgap for the incompleteness of our knowledge. If in fact the frontiers of knowledge are being pushed further and further back, and that is bound to be the case, then God is being pushed back with them and is therefore continually in retreat." On the one hand, I agree that arguments for God should start not from what we don't know, but from what we do know. They should start with effects we observe and then reason to a cause for those effects.
Well, that might be a better approach, but I think that you'll still run afoul of the fallacy. So you're trying to explain effects, and then at some point you run out of an explanation for the effect, so you say God. It's still the same problem.
And then show that that cause must have divine attributes. We shouldn't just act like Bill O'Reilly in this clip in a conversation he had with atheist David Silverman.
I'll tell you why it's not a scam, in my opinion. All right. Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can.
I love that clip. It's great. I don't want. All right.
On the other hand, I worry that atheists who lean too much into the God of the Gaps objection, they'll end up making atheism as unfalsifiable as some religions.
Oh, yeah. Nice try, dude. Too quick, I said. Too quick. No, it's absolutely falsifiable. Demonstrate a God. Any God exists, and that's it. That's all it takes. That's it. Period. But it hasn't been done. So until you do it, it's not a thing yet. So you haven't. Nobody has produced this evidence of a God in such a way that everyone is convinced of it, and that no one could. Well, I suppose a few people might have problems with it, but yeah, that okay.
Or they won't be able to answer this question: what would prove God exists? A few examples I've heard from atheists include.
Okay, so I'll answer the question. God could prove that God exists, supposedly, apparently, possibly. So God is the answer. What would prove God? God. That's it. Just like what proves deconverted man exists is deconverted man himself. I'm here. Here I am. Hi, you can hear me. And right now you see a picture, icon of me. I can, of course, plug in my webcam. You can see my actual face. I haven't done that in a while. Here's a picture of me. There you go. That's good enough because I don't want to plug in my webcam. It might disconnect me and everything. So, yeah. But at any rate, you can hear me. You can interact with me. You can poke me. You can feel me. You can smell me. You could taste me. I am empirically verifiable in many, many ways. Your God is not. So that's a problem. I think I'll switch to the other. There we go. Let's do that one. Yeah, okay. So I am evidence that I am a thing. I think that's pretty solid evidence. There's somebody in my chat room, Southern Hemisphere Globehead, saying, how is it at me? And then clapping or waving dumbbells. I'm not sure what's going on in those emoji icons. But at any rate, so I know that they are a person because, well, I can intuit that they're a person. Maybe they're a bot, but I've seen them before, and they've wrote non-bot things, and they respond, and so we're proof of each. That's proof that there's somebody there typing, and somebody I'm interacting with. Now, I don't know, maybe they don't want to show their face or reveal their voice or what have you, but I can still type to them and they'll type back, and that's something. That's more than I have of your God or any God for that matter. And so I have zero proof of God in the way that I have zero proof of goblins, ogres, and dragons. So there are no God. There is no God until it reveals itself, and it hasn't done so in a way that I can be sure it's a thing. I know that Trent here is a person. Now, maybe his actual name isn't Trent. Maybe that's a pseudonym. Maybe all sorts of things. But look, this is a human. I know that computers are pretty good at mimicking humans, but not this good. So there's little reason to doubt that this is an actual person actually talking about things. So I don't have that for God. God could appear on YouTube, make a video, and produce it for all of YouTube to see and say, "Hi, I'm God. How's it going? Here's how I work. Here's how things work. Here's information that only I could have." Yes, viewer 14, your real name is whatever, and you don't mind that I tell everybody your address, or whatever, or all sorts of things that God could do to prove itself to not just me, because that wouldn't be good enough, but to all humanity at the same time. And yet God doesn't do that, and won't do that, and cannot do that because there isn't one.
Include healing an amputated limb through prayer, rearranging the stars to say God exists, or discovering on the human genetic code that our genetic code says made by Yahweh on it. Evan Vales says that if all the stars realign to spell the words Mene Mene Tekel Uparshin, which is what God wrote on the wall at Belshazzar's feast in the book of Daniel, then, quote, that would convince me of theism or polytheism. No other explanation is remotely plausible.
I actually disagree because I'm a skeptic. So there are other explanations possible, but it would be amazing, and it would definitely be a game changer if we had something like this occur. If we had a demonstrable event where it was well documented and filmed, recorded, reported on. Everybody was there. It was a live event where we witnessed somebody getting prayed for and their limb regrowing. That would be amazing. That would change things. It would certainly give us pause. And we would investigate into the matter fully because, well, it would be an error to think, well, that must mean that prayer is what did it. There might be some other explanation. But those things are amazing things that we've never seen. And the point is not that those things, if done, would necessarily convince us, but it certainly would compel us to consider it more than we are now. But the other point that you're missing, I think, is that we have not seen any of these events, and we're not going to. They're not going to happen. And I can say that with a very solid assurance, because if they were going to happen, they would have happened. Of course, they happened way a long time ago when you couldn't demonstrably demonstrate anything. All the miracles of magic happened in the past where we can't verify it conveniently, or conveniently nobody is able to replicate the thing. So it's very convenient how magic functions in that way. It works when no one else is looking.
Doug from the Pine Creek channel says that since the prophet Elijah could call down fire to light a soaked sacrifice in the book of Kings, and he could one up the prophets of Baal by doing that, then Christians should be able to prove Christianity is true by just setting a wet napkin on fire.
Yeah, it's called a repeatable test. And if Yahweh doesn't change, which is an assertion made by some Christians and not others, but if Yahweh doesn't change and Yahweh was able to be tested in this way in the past, then it would follow that Yahweh is able to be tested this way in the present. Of course, the demonstration is different, so you might object to it. It's like, well, God wouldn't do a napkin because it's not an altar to Baal. Well, very well, let's assemble an altar to Baal and an altar to Yahweh and repeat the demonstration and forget about it being wet or anything like that. Let's just see if it happens. Unless it's a stormy day where there's a lot of lightning going on, there's very low probability that your wood's going to get ignited, and so perhaps you might get lucky if you do it long enough and enough times where lightning hits one of the two piles and it erupts in flames. Of course, let's perhaps do it on a clear day so that that's not a thing, because we could just say, well, that was a lightning. But if you could repeat it over and over again, and if every time it happened, that would be something to investigate. We just don't have that sort of thing, though. So that's kind of the point being made, is that we don't even have this thing as an example. And it might prove to some that God exists. Maybe not to the more skeptically inclined person like me, but it would. But I certainly would say, wow, that's amazing. Let's look into that further.
Through prayer. Now, some of the examples are better than others, but they all share the same flaw. I would ask the non-believers who offer these examples, why would these particular things convince you that God exists?
That's a decent enough question, but it's certainly one that is answerable. So I'm waiting for the one question that can't be answered. I'm wondering if it's a loaded question or something insane. Those wouldn't really, like I said, those wouldn't necessarily convince me. I think that if they happened, well, first it would be chaos. It would be worldwide news. And I say it chaos because humans would respond by completely losing their minds. That's broadly speaking what would happen. There would be riots, there'd be people running around in the streets, there'd be all sorts of insanities because people wouldn't be able to handle that sort of thing. It would be akin to a large UFO or even a small UFO that was an well, I should say not UFO. I should say alien spacecraft entering Earth's orbit. It would panic the masses. Humans just our puny brains just can't really grapple with it. Not everybody would panic, but a lot of people would. So that's one thing that would happen, is people would freak out. Another thing is people might actually gear up for war with each other, thinking that it's some sort of trick, or they might think, oh, now is a good time to go invade whoever because they're distracted by this. I'm sure that religions that didn't agree would say that this was a hoax perpetrated by by that religion, and they might go prepare for all sorts of insanities would occur if this occurred. That's first of all. Second, that would happen after maybe people calm down and whatnot is there would be a wide scale investigation done by scientists of all sorts, and everybody would demand to know what's going on and why, and we'd want to figure it out. Of course, the theologians would all say that this is God, and there'd be people worshiping and praying and all sorts of things, and it would certainly be amazing, and it would change the world as we know it. And as for me, I would be like, well, that's amazing, that's really cool. I would like some more information. I mean, if you see a limb regrow, that's pretty cool. You see it happen again, that's really cool. You see the stars rearrange themselves in the sky to form certain words. It's like, okay, are you going to communicate with us now, or are you just going to write that one message? I mean, why be the one single event? Why not give us the whole thing? Why not just communicate with us like any other human communicates with us? Why remain somewhat distant and somewhat hidden, God? Why reveal part of yourself but not your full self? So I'd have a question. I think that the theist also would be asking similar questions, especially if it wasn't their God. If the thing, if it was that the God was prayed to was a Hindu God, and that regrew the limb, would you think that that proves the Hindu God? Would if the stars arranged themselves in a pattern in the sky that spelled out something in Hindu that said the name of a Hindu god, Shiva the destroyer or whatever, would that prove the Hindu God to you? Or what would what would convince you that a different God existed? And why would that one thing convince you? So I can ask the same question to you, and the answer I think would be that it might not actually convince you, that you might need more than just that, and that the reasons that you need more than that is because well, you've been given one thing, now you're going to be a little bit greedy and want more, right? So but the God itself, I think, could prove itself. um, Now, there are humans that exist that defy logic and reason with their beliefs. Uh, you could say flat earthers, perhaps, but I kind of, feel bad, like maybe the snake handlers might be a better example because they see the snakes bite them, but their claim is that the snakes will not bite you, and that they see that they get poisoned, even though their claim is that you can't be poisoned by the snake. So they see demonstrable demonstration that the snake is doing things that they believe it cannot do. So they instead say, well, if you get bit or if you get poisoned, or not poisoned, it's venom, it affects you. If it if you get that, then that's because you didn't have enough faith. It's not that the thing failed, it's that you failed. And similarly with acupuncture, people will insist that it works even though there's no demonstrable demonstration that it works. Uh, no repeatable test has been done to show that it actually is doing what people claim that it's doing. And it's all based on complete pseudoscience, completely made up stuff of chakras and areas and of your chi and whatever. And you look at the maps that people just completely made up of the body of where you're supposed to put the pin in. and that changes from person to person. So it's completely and utterly a placebo effect, um, and it can't be replicated in decent quantity. But the people that believe in it will look at all the results, look at all the data, and make an excuse to why it failed. They'll say, no, 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 you didn't do it this way, or didn't do it, and in fact, that's embedded in the teachings of acupuncture. That if you put it in and it didn't cause the result, well, you didn't put it in the right angle. You need to flick it. You need to, and then finally, if all else fails, well, it's because the patient wasn't wasn't willing or something like that. So it's never the fault of the particular the art itself. It's never the fault of that. It's always the fault of the patient. So there's always a way to goal shift back. And similarly, um, you could say, despite all the evidence of a different God existing, you could assert that actually that's a test produced from the actual God, that is your God. Or you could think, oh, it's a trick from the devil trying to confuse us. The actual God, of course, is letting the devil test us for whatever reason. You could always do that. Um, I don't care what God it is that happens to be correct. I could be convinced by that God. I think God could do a lot more than these simple things to prove itself, but at least it could start with those. But it shouldn't just rely upon those singular things. And similarly, I highly doubt that you, um, uh, Trent, would, yeah, I forgot his name, that you would accept a different God. Or, what if aliens came to Earth and said, we've explored everything. There's absolutely no God. I mean, would that convince you there's no God? Or, what if time travelers came? And said, oh, we went back in time. We can't find God. We went forward in time. We can't find God. No, that wouldn't, because you can always move the goalposts back. Say somebody invents some sort of machine that opens up a rift into the what you would call the supernatural realm, and finds a different entity there that's not God, but it's weird and bizarre and strange. It's something like Cthulhu or whatever. And you could say, well, the real God's in a different realm that you can't access by that machine. You can always come up with some excuse. Whereas the skeptical mind says, like, you doubt until there's justification for it to no longer warrant doubt. And a healing of a limb would certainly be something worth investigating, but by itself might not be evidence of God. I would certainly want it to be repeatable. It certainly would be more than what we have now. Right now, we don't even have these examples. So I think that my answer is that these things, for me, wouldn't prove God necessarily, and that only God itself could prove that it's God, and it could do that in a way that would satisfy all of us, not just some of us, because it's God. It could do that. Well, unless it can't do that, and then in that case, I suppose there would be humans that were given all the evidence of God that you could want, but still said, no, that's a government conspiracy or something like that.
I suspect ultimately this is the reasoning. I don't know what caused a limb to be healed, or the stars to move, or the napkin to catch fire. I can't imagine a natural cause. Therefore, God must have done it. In other words, they commit the God of the gaps fallacy in their hypothetical evidence. I don't know what caused X. Therefore, God exists. Here's a blatant example of this from my debate with atheist Dan Barker. When I asked Barker what would convince him to give up atheism, he said that if I prayed and told him what was written inside an envelope he had on stage with him, then he would believe God exists. He also claimed that since God is all-knowing, I could pray to God and God would tell me what's written on the card. Here is my reply.
So let me understand, we have 15 seconds left. If Jesus appeared and performed a miracle for you, you would ask God to apologize. But if I could do a magic trick, you would
It's not a magic trick.
a Christian.
It's not a magic trick, Trent.
I mean, suppose I really did guess what was written on the envelope, inside the envelope. Would Dan Barker convert? No way. He'd think, well, maybe it was a lucky guess.
How do you know that? I mean, you just said no way. You don't know that. How do you know that? Now I'm asking, how do you know that? You don't know his mind. This is just pure assertion from you don't know what maybe he would have, maybe he wouldn't convert, but he might indeed believe in God in that moment. It certainly would upstage him had you done it, but the fact of the matter is it can't be done. That's the point, is no matter how much you pray, no matter what you do, God won't do the thing to prove that it's there. Not to you, not to anyone else. And I mean prove, not just like, oh, I feel a feeling. No, that's not good enough. Okay, so good question. You catching up with the stream. Would the repeatability of some kind of napkin test possibly interfere with it understanding as a miracle? Well, this is kind of a problem of what miracle is defined to be, but it's a problem that is not one I have. It is a problem wholly of the making of what miracle is, and I've made videos about that. So yeah, it's convoluted and complicated. But no, it's worth exploring. So if I did something and I said, okay, that's a miracle, how would you know it's a miracle? And I've asked this question of theists. So what, I asked this during my talk with the guy that did the quote, not enough quotes in the universe, quote, skeptic course, which was just Apologetics 101. And I reamed him over the coals during our interview, where he was extraordinarily, well, whatever, you can watch it. But I said, let's suppose that my door of my room opens on its own, and we don't discover any person or animal that did it. Would I be justified in saying a ghost did it? So I think, I would think that something was wrong with the foundation or the latch mechanism. And I said, exactly. At what point would you be justified in saying that it was a ghost? You didn't answer the question. So if you do something that appears to be miraculous, how would anyone possibly say it was an actual miracle? If it's only a one-time event that can only happen once and not again, or it can happen again, but it's extraordinarily rare. It can't be done on command. So couldn't it just be a magic trick? Couldn't it just be a sleight of hand or a trick of some sort? It could be. Very well could be. In fact, more than likely it is that. It is not something magical, mystical, or supernatural. The more likely answer is that it's wholly natural and that you simply don't know how the trick was done. Because we know for a fact that people can do those sort of things. But we do not know that there's a ghost to open a door, let alone that if there was a ghost, that it could open a door. So the impossibility of even identifying a miracle in the first place is a conundrum that the theist, in my view, cannot resolve. Even if they were real, miracles could not be demonstrated. And I have a video about it somewhere, even if real. Let's see. Okay, let's see. All right, well, I'll get it up on the description later. All right, back to the video.
this. Or maybe before the debate, when he was distracted, I opened the envelope, I read it, and then I resealed it. That would be way more likely than a miracle. I mean, look what happened when actor Harrison Ford picked a card out of a deck from magician David Blaine. And Blaine then pulled that card out of an orange in Ford's kitchen. Did Harrison Ford say, "Oh my gosh, you're divine," or "Oh my gosh, God exists"? No, he said this.
"Get the out of my house."
Or at best, Dan would think that I have some unknown natural or supernatural power to read hidden messages, but not that God exists. In that debate, it was amazing to me that Dan Barker just hand waved away my philosophical arguments for the existence of God.
So there was only one real evidence that Trent offered tonight. The rest is just words. And I think you know what that is. The rest is just philosophy and talking words.
But then he said that if I could perform a magic trick, he'd believe that God exists. So I think this shows we have a double standard among some atheists.
I think that it shows that you lost that debate and you're kind of hung up on it, perhaps. No, since you're going to read Dan Barker's mind, I might as well read your mind, right? Look, you asked him a question. He tried to answer the question. Only now, it's what would convince you? And Matt Dillahunty has said God could convince him. I think that's a decent answer. Yeah, he before that he was like, well, and then Dawkins has said, well, maybe nothing would convince me. And of course, then you'll say, well, see, there you go, ha 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 ha. So it's a no-win, right, for some, but that's one person. That's a few. At best, you have a selection of atheists who have a double standard. And what's your argument? Because that's not an argument against atheism. That's showing that those particular atheists have a double standard. So what? Being a hypocrite is not a logical fallacy. So it doesn't negate the argument. It doesn't negate the point that they might be trying to make. It doesn't negate atheism. It doesn't prove theism. It's completely and wholly irrelevant. So there you go. What parameters that you could put around a so-called Navkin test that would make it clearly supernatural as opposed to a property of nature under such circumstances? I don't know. I have no idea. Off the top of my head, I would think that you would have, well, let's say we'll keep it as a napkin. You would first make sure it's a normal napkin by looking at it through a microscope or even an electric microscope, say, and then putting it inside a vacuumed chamber where there is no air at all, and it's a clear chamber, glass chamber that's fully sealed, and multiple cameras are on it, and multiple people are witnessing it, but they're separated. They're separated from the chamber by the glass, of course, and then the person says the prayer, and the napkin erupts in flame, which is something that shouldn't be possible without air. I think that would be pretty darn compelling, that it was beyond the natural, because it simply would be inexplicable. It'd be something that we would not know the answer to for sure, and not only and perhaps that we couldn't even begin to answer it. Let's say that we had heat thermometers there, we had infrared, we had cameras that detected heat and everything else you could want there, and we examined thoroughly as the napkin, in slow motion, as the napkin erupts in flame in a vacuum, mind you, and we, it would say, well, is it the prayer? And you do it again, and you do a different prayer, nothing happens. You do a different prayer, nothing happens. Only when this prayer is done that it happens. It's like, well, maybe it's the person. So you have the person do different things, and it's like, no, anyone can do the prayer and it works, and so you have it be a recorded robotic voice, like the computer voice says the prayer, and it still happens. It just, that would be amazing. I don't know that. I guess it would be called a miracle at some point. It's certainly inexplicable, but to call it a miracle perhaps is the fallacy. Perhaps the fallacy is that it is unexplained, but that doesn't mean it's unexplainable. Does that mean it must be natural and we just don't know? No, that's not the answer. Does it mean it must be supernatural? No. Perhaps the answer is we don't know. And we have a mystery that we can't solve. And asserting anything one way or the other is incorrect. Perhaps that's the true solution to such a phenomenon if we indeed ever encountered it. But we haven't, and we won't.
Specifically among those who dismiss classical arguments for God as essentially saying, I don't know, therefore God. They dismiss all the classic proofs. I don't know, therefore God. But then they say you could prove God exists through one of their hypothetical examples, like guessing a card in an envelope, which is also a case of I don't know, therefore God. I mean, what's the difference between an amputated limb coming into existence from nothing, proving God exists, and a universe coming into nothing, coming into being from nothing?
That's a decent question. We've never observed humans having the ability to regrow limbs. Humans have amazing healing ability in that, we have white blood cells and our body can repair itself, but there's a limit to it. And unless you had some genetic tampering going on, where, I don't know, you crossbred a starfish into a human or something, it's something we've never ever observed, is that somebody's limb regrows. By the way, this is from the God Doesn't Heal Amputees website. Was a big deal back in the day. I don't know if it's still around, but at any rate, it was a very good argument, and it was rampant on YouTube and everywhere. It's just like God Doesn't Heal Amputees.com or whatever it was, and it was like nobody could answer this question: why doesn't God heal amputees? And it's like, he also doesn't heal scars either, or regrow teeth. So that's kind of a problem. Why does your God not do these things? God healed this person's cancer. Oh, that's interesting. But he didn't regrow that person's limb. Why not? And he didn't heal the scar. Why not? He didn't regrow the teeth. Why not? I remember when I brought up the scar thing to somebody one time, they said, well, scars are a special thing. And they started going into this long explanation of why God didn't heal scars. So I'm like, no, stop. No, come on. We've never, ever observed a human regrowing a limb. So it would be inexplicable. It would be unexplained and perhaps unexplainable, except for perhaps appealing to the divine, which I submit is not an explanation, but nonetheless, it certainly would be worth investigating. What the difference between that and the universe is, we don't know that the universe came from nothing. We do not know anything like that at all, and we certainly have yet to unravel how the universe came to be in that way. At the T1 point, beyond that, we don't know. And cosmologists do not know. You can ask them. They will tell you it is not settled. We don't know if there's a beginning to the universe. No idea. And the only time that they assert otherwise is not in a peer-reviewed published paper. It is through books or philosophical talks. It is not done through the scientific process of peer review. So there's no model. There's no anything to back it on. So we don't know that the universe came from nothing. So there's a big difference there. Just saying.
Wouldn't that also prove God exists if that's what happened? The bottom line is that no matter what wildly fantastic scenario an atheist proposes that would allegedly prove God exists, you could always ask him, how do you know that there isn't an unknown natural explanation for that scenario? This is illustrated well in the following exchange between the Protestant philosopher William.
And yeah, so perhaps asserting magic or miracles is a bad explanation always. So if God did appear and did all sorts of things to convince us that it was God, it might not actually be God. It might just be a very powerful alien. And I would probably say I might say something like, I don't know that you're really God. Now, here's the thing. Why would God care? If it's really God, like, yeah, I know. I knew you were going to say that, and that's fine. I understand. Why would God care what we believe? Wow. Loud engine outside.
William Lane Craig and the atheist philosopher Keith Parsons.
But you're saying that when you say extraordinary, really what you're saying is no amount of evidence would convince me of these extraordinary claims.
Sure it would. If tomorrow morning, immediately after breakfast, suddenly there was an earthquake, and a silvery light shone in the sky and the leaves dropped from the trees. And I dashed outside and there, towering over us like 100 Everests, was this giant figure with lightning playing around his Michelangeloid face. And he pointed down and saying, "Be assured, Keith M. Parsons, that I do in fact exist and I'm sick of your logic chopping." Dr. Craig, I would join you in the pew of the church, in the front pew of the church the next Sunday.
Yeah, so these things are things that won't happen. He is certain that this will never occur. But your complaint is, well, you're being a hypocrite because that would, if it did happen, you would be committing the God of the gaps fallacy by asserting that it's God in that moment. And that might be the case. But if it actually is God, who cares? It's no longer a fallacy. So all you're saying is that you want people to be more skeptical. I agree. I also would like people to be more skeptical, which means we should never, ever assert God for an answer for anything. But you do. Why? Why do you assert God if God is not a good explanation? Never mind that atheists might come up with a reason, a thing that would convince them. Of course, if they say nothing would convince them, you go, aha, I'm right. See, nothing would convince you, ha ha ha. And the thing that would convince me of God is God. But then I could still be skeptical at some level in my brain or even out loud. But couldn't the being, if it had enough power, just make me believe it anyways? It could. So that would negate me deciding. And if it wanted to do that, it could. So, of course, Q from Star Trek, a fictional character with all these abilities and powers, could say it's God, and it could tell, and people could think it would think it's God because it could do all sorts of things that only a God could do, or at least appears godlike. And of course, Picard visits this planet once, and they think he's God because he can do all these things that they can't do. And he shows them, no, I'm not God, I'm mortal, and so I just have more abilities than you. So Q just has more abilities than other creatures possess. Perhaps the greatest analogy that Star Trek had to offer is in Deep Space Nine of the wormhole aliens that are not bound by linear time. Are they aliens or are they prophets? Are they God or gods, or are they just beings that are not like us? And that's up to faith. Those that have faith will say that they're gods and that they're prophets. Those without will say they're aliens with advanced technology. Which is the right answer? If you have faith, you don't need the evidence because you have the faith. If you don't have faith, you need evidence. And perhaps the problem is God hasn't provided any evidence ever in all of the course of human history. At least not any evidence that could not be confused with evidence that humans could themselves produce. So God acts identically to nature, and you're missing the point. These outlandish things that would prove God to the atheist in the moment that they're asked that question are things that they know won't happen. And you know that they won't happen as well. And the reason that we all know that it won't happen is that God, for whatever reason, will not prove himself in any way to anyone ever, except for the special ways that you think God has already proven itself to people way back in the past, or perhaps in the present, through feelings that you've experienced during moments in your life. Woohoo, not much to go on. So, do you actually have a question that cannot be answered? Because I'm pretty sure I've blown through all of this so far. And I haven't heard yet the question that I can't answer.
But earlier in the debate, Keith Parsons said it would always be more reasonable to think the disciples hallucinated when they thought Jesus rose from the dead.
Okay, so just more examples. So I'm getting the feeling that at no point does he actually have a question that we cannot answer, which, again, isn't much of anything. And I think I've addressed your complaints. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm going to do something unusual because it's a 20-minute video and I don't want to be here for like 20 hours explaining why he's wrong. If you want me to address a portion of this video, tell me the timestamp in the comments below, and I'll do that. But I might just do it in text format rather than in video format. It depends. But for now, I think that I've answered this whatever this is decently enough. And if Trent actually responds to this video, that will be nice. He's debated some high-level people. Maybe he'll debate little old me. I don't know. But I don't know that the debate would be, well, I don't know. You know, the thing is with debate is it's great if you understand logic. You can decide who loses a debate because whoever has logical fallacies loses. And it could be the case that both people lose the debate. And in that case, well, then you have to be skeptical of everyone's conclusion. That means skepticism has an advantage over belief because, well, you're still skeptical at the end. And the reason I'm skeptical of your God and all gods is that they don't have empirical evidence, repeatable tests, or a valid and sound argument for their existence. And I strongly suspect that all your arguments against those atheists, you had the arguments that rely upon God of the gaps at some level. But I haven't watched them, so I'm not sure for sure. But if not, they might contain other logical fallacies. Where's your argument and where's your evidence that God exists? I'm waiting. All right, thanks for watching. Post your thing, and let me know what you want. I'll do that. Thanks for the thing. Yeah, see you next time. Well, I won't see you unless you're on camera, but then you'll. Jeez. How do I eat lobsters? Do I end with that? What do I?